One of the reasons why I wanted to talk on this particular topic is that I feel that having the influence over all of those different programs really allows me to take the voice of the customer, the messaging, and really amplify it and get it consistent across all of the messages so that the hard work that you do with your message allows your intended targets to hear it, if you do it more than once. So that's kind of the reason I wanted to speak on this particular panel. So I'm happy to talk about any of those things as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Kevin, why don't you share, so we know you're from Adobe, we know you know how to measure what matters, thank you for that, and we know you look great in purple, because some of us only look good in orange, so why don't you share a little bit more about how integrated messaging shows up within your company structure? That is a big question. I would say more about maybe some more background about Adobe so we have some more context.
Yeah, so from an integrated messaging standpoint, so we have multiple different teams, right? We have a centralized PR comms organization, so they push out a lot of the press releases. Anytime we do a customer story, we typically use the blog as a central mechanism for storytelling. We also do a lot of video content. So Adobe is a very matrix organization, similar to probably AWS, Amazon, where our team specifically doesn't report up to a CMO. So we report up to a GM of our business unit. And so we have to work with a lot of teams internally, not just marketing, but also service-based teams that cover everything from SEO to content to syndication, et cetera. And so when we think about pushing something out, we actually had to do it this morning, where we just finished up our awards program the past 2 days, and we had to get something announced this morning, and the blog post is one of the major mechanisms for doing so. There was probably 50 other people on the back end that were all signing off on the content, everything from social and some of the PR teams like I mentioned. And so it does require definitely a project management lens to make sure you're very coordinated just to be able to do all that.
I love that you called out the syndication kind of thinking there. Bridget, how does this show up at Slack?
Yeah, I think to start, I think I wanted to just start by talking about why I was yes, I'll do this panel.
Bridget, why?
Because I think Eileen said, the first two big kind of customer marketing tech jobs that I had, I was wearing all of the hats. But my very first job in tech I was a social media coordinator, and I just sort of grew up on a marketing team for 5 years. And so my lens that I think of customer marketing is true demand gen foundation based. So when I think about building programs, I'm always wearing my marketing hat, and I think that having that hat on as we're trying to build notoriety internally or externally for the programs that we're developing, it just innately helps us to amplify. So that's sort of the lens I'm looking at this topic with. At Slack specifically, I've been there for about 8 months, and sort of my role there as it relates to integrated messaging is that I'm responsible for our enterprise customer marketing. So Slack is very interesting in that it was recently acquired by Salesforce, and so it is sort of this startup feel within this kind of gigantic, titanic infrastructure-led environment like Salesforce, where we're navigating both of those feelings at the same time. So it's definitely been a unique experience in that respect. And my job is to make sure that our Slack corporate messaging, that digital HQ message that we're taking to market, is integrated in our customer stories and how we show up on stage at events, and that when Salesforce shows up on stage at events and talking about Slack, that it also sounds the same. So it's really important for me to be that sort of central control of the message.
I think that's a good place to start, and then we'll work our way back down the panel of, okay, so that's what you're tasked with. We know that's important. What are some of the major challenges you face in making that happen?
Me again?
Yeah.
Okay. It's very challenging. I mean, I think it's hard in any organization to like ramp up, especially when it's a ginormous organization. So I've only been there 8 months, and I'm really just starting to see like the fruits of my labor like come to fruition. Like we had Frontiers this week, like getting like those big customers on stage, like giant marquee videos, like lots of stories coming out, but like those were months in the making. And I think it's been challenging because I'm building this particular function from nothing. This particular like view of the customer marketing world did not exist. So it's a lot of like working with the brand team, working with our content team, working with the Salesforce customer marketing team, and just trying to, it's a lot of just cross-functional alignment and making sure everybody's on the same page while also doing a lot of tactical work. So you're doing like all levels of the conversation you're responsible for.
Kevin, you mentioned, the different streams that the messaging might come through and that you're syndicating. When you came to Adobe, or even as Adobe grew and transitioned, did other teams like dictate that structure and you had to like work within that structure, or were you able to collaborate with them to create processes to make it all work together?
Yeah, I mean, so has anyone gone through an acquisition before or been part of one? So probably similar to Bridget too. I'll just say there's moments where there's crunchiness. We went from 1,500 person company, Marketo, right, to well over 30,000 employees at Adobe. And so the scale of magnitude was massive, right? They were looking at us sort of like the new kids on the block, and they had process in place, and they were trying to see, are we going to adopt their methodology? Are we going to change things up? Luckily, we had the support of our CMO, who was actually a really strong advocate at the executive level. And so things that were no longer working, like some of these people have been doing it for like 10, 15 years, where they had a certain process for how they got stories out there, or how they approach customer references, et cetera. And so it gave us an opportunity to kind of think about how do we kind of reimagine some of that. And it did take a couple of years, I'll be honest. Like, they left us alone for a little bit, like 6 to 8 months, where Marketo was its own kind of standalone business unit. But then eventually we got integrated, and teams started to kind of clash and come together. And, it's a little, I'll be honest, it's a little bit political too, with just depending on people, they want to have certain fiefdoms that they're building within their organizations. Like, there were 6 different teams that functioned and had sort of like customer, essentially like a function within customer marketing. But it didn't necessarily make sense from a continuity standpoint, from a customer experience standpoint. And so we had to kind of make, decisions about how could we readjust what does that customer experience look like. And really that helped us build that center of excellence that I mentioned yesterday. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of the long story behind it.
Yeah, well, it certainly gives more context to, what you had to work within. And I just hear, 30,000 people, and I just think, ooh, that's, it's a lot. It's a lot to navigate. And there's so many change management elements you have to do there. And Eileen, I'm sure, you dealt with that as well when you joined ICE Mortgage, or even as that transition. Did you go through an acquisition as well?
Yeah, we did about a year and a half ago. I think one of the biggest challenges is that you can't automate customer messaging, you really can't automate this, what we're talking about here, this consistent messaging. And one of the things that I got when I inherited my team, and I think most of you will have this experience in your career, is that I have bounced around as a direct report into demand generation, into communications, I was advocacy all by myself, as a direct line to our SVP of marketing. So I have bounced around within the marketing function, keeping my area. So those are opportunities for you as that happens to you to redefine what you're doing and make those connections. And I think you've heard most of the people talking about, it's all about relationships. And so where I came in to my team, they were pretty much order takers and just creating the content. And I saw an opportunity there to take this challenge where we weren't having consistent messaging because there was no way to automate it and you really didn't know unless somebody was paying attention. And taking a lot of the work that I had been doing solo and empowering my team to expand their knowledge. So one of my teammates is responsible for the customer awards program and customer stories. Another one is taken over our advocacy platform, and another one is doing more around our blog and social media presence. In addition to what they're already doing, which is writing all of the content, but it allows me to then take the messaging that we're doing, and it gets funneled down automatically because this one person is responsible for not only writing the blog, but then they also do the social media post for it, and then they will then get it over to our Influitive platform to create a challenge for our advocates to do. And then my role being higher is then to also look for those opportunities where I can give them air cover. Because one of the things that, we can be in control of how the email that goes out and those kinds of things, but what also helps you with your messaging or the thought leadership pieces and things like that. And so then I try to take advantage of opportunities to get executives out there. We write pieces on them that will help cover what we're trying to do. So we can be pithy and cute and fun at our level. We can't necessarily do that at the exec level, but they can talk about what's important and sort of set the stage on that so that people start hearing our messaging. So it's kind of been my little insidious plan to just do it from a grassroots guerrilla warfare
Eileen has been plotting.
I have been plotting. But it is a challenge, and now the biggest thing is as you mentioned, so my company does mortgage tech software. We automate the mortgage industry's loan origination process. It's a B2B. The borrower doesn't know we exist. But we were acquired by Intercontinental Exchange, which is a data services, fixed income, and exchange company whose goal is to digitize processes that were analog. So one of the companies they have is the New York Stock Exchange. So they took it from the paper on the floor to what we know today, and that's what they're trying to do with the mortgage process. The complication for us becomes now, we were this fun, we used to be called Ellie Mae, the tchotchke, kings and queens, like we had all that fun stuff, because if you think about real estate industry, they put their faces on the shopping cart and stuff. It's a really interesting industry. You think mortgage brokers would be boring, but they're actually not. They're like self-promoters. But now we've got this big corporation, and so now we're trying to figure out how do we get their brand in, and how do we, and complement what we're trying to do. So that's our next level challenge is taking what we used to be and then bringing in that corporate, which is not as exciting as
Right.
the old days.
Yeah, your reflexes are like, make it fun, make it fun. And
yeah.
then, yeah. I'm glad that you shared that example about like the brand change and even, with the acquisitions, I'm sure that's come up as well. I'm curious, how would you define the other types of messaging that you have to navigate to like deliver consistent in a consistent way? And I'm asking that because I'm thinking about, from my experience, like product changes, product updates. We did a bunch of changes in our navigation, and our advocates are power users, so they're going to be the first to know. And I'm curious, how would you define, like, besides even the brand changes, what are some of the like top recurring things that come up?
I can mention some of it from like a product feedback adoption standpoint. So I would say, like, when we're going through this whole transition, becoming part of the larger Adobe business, some of our PM teams have been like super tenured. They've been there for a long time. If anyone's familiar with the term rest and vest, like these are folks that'll be there for probably 10, 15 years in the future. And so they had a lot of clout internally. And so their process for how they got releases out there or updates was very systematic, but there was often a piece missing where it was like customer feedback and voice of the customer. And so we had to tackle some of these challenges about, how do we get the customers directly embedded into the conversation when they're going through that feedback loop? And sometimes it was squishy conversations where we just had to literally just go around them and prove sort of like that impact and let them say, like, let's test something out, let's try something, see if that works, and then next time we do a release, they come back to us and saying like, hey, can we leverage your advocates or what you guys have built? And that's where we started to infuse a lot of our user groups and our champion programs directly into the conversation, and it changed a lot of the dynamics. But their leadership team originally was like very resistant to change and like how they approach that kind of stuff. So from a product lens, that's kind of like one example.
That's very helpful, like for specifics. And Bridget, for you at Slack, you know, you mentioned that there's like a lot of things that you have to be keep a pulse on and deliver back. Would you say that how would you say that you found success, like delivering the messages that you need to deliver about what your enterprise customer advocates need back into the other channels?
Okay.
I'm thinking like
yeah.
full circle now, yeah.
That is a tough question. I would say that we're just getting to that place. I mean, I've been there 8 months, and so like as I was saying, like I'm just starting to see like the return on some of the groundwork that I've laid, and it takes a long time, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you know, we just had IBM, who is our keynote speaker this week, and we had changed the date of our Frontiers conference to June, so we had a really tight timeline to get it together, and just laying the groundwork with them took weeks and weeks and weeks, and it was still like incredibly tough to get that all through legally. We did videos. They won our big Spotlight Award. They were the featured keynote customer. You know, there were 3 people on a panel who were like executive lead. It was like a whole thing. And when I say that, like, did I take the time and space yet to like do maybe a debrief with them? I think like that would be a good example for this question. Like, yes, I mean that happened Wednesday, but I do have the intent to work with them probably in the next week or so to make sure that their experience was okay, that there's anything else I can do to help get their messaging or their needs and wants back into the organization, or that we build these sort of like long-term engagement plans with these customers so that it's a long-term relationship. It's not a one and done, and that there's always a story to tell across, you know, their life cycle with us. Yeah, like I think it's just one example. I think we're just getting to a point as we're starting to see some of this stuff like happen, that we can then say, look, here's success. We'll get that momentum and have more customers, and then we can continue that process with some of these really enterprise level customers moving forward.
Yeah, what do you think, Eileen?
Well, I'm a big fan of kickoff meetings, so I'm just going to go down to the tactical level here because one of the things that I have found has worked really well in keeping our message consistent is getting all the players in the same room at the same time, and we brainstorm and we come to an agreement on what the messaging is going to be, what the assets that are going to be created are going to be. You know, are we going to do a webinar? Are we going to do a blog? Are we going to do all of it? Or, you know, and then the other is then like those key messages. And then we put it into a brief, and we go back to it, because you know what happens, especially if you're doing a longer campaign, you know, you get a couple months into it and somebody gets really excited about a new idea, and then they want to spiral off into it, and next thing you know, you've digressed from what you're currently doing. I mean, we're working on a summer campaign right now, and I have had to fight the fight because one of our features is e-closing, which allows you to close your loan electronically. And we are trying to take a journey with our customers on first that this is easy, and then it's smart, and then it's now, and create the FOMO. And so all of a sudden, you're starting to, you know, we were starting to get, you know, in the middle portion, you know, we're like 2 months in, and all of a sudden people are thinking they want to do something else. I'm like, no, we had agreed on this, and we had laid this out. And so it's really helpful because you forget what you said 60 days ago. You really do. So I would really strongly recommend you get all of your players in there, because then you can get the people who have the access to customer stories, and then you can get them to say, well, then I'm going to reach out to so-and-so and see if they'd be willing to be on the panel for the webinar. And then, you know, you get the video crew in and all those people, and it slows the process down a little bit in the beginning. But then, you know, so you go slow to go fast, is essentially. So I would strongly recommend that that's an easy step that you can do to help you with, if you're finding that you're struggling with consistent messaging, to start there.
So I'm hearing kickoff meeting, I'm hearing like campaign brief that's
Yep.
continually updated. Do you also do recurring meetings with like those stakeholders or
Yes.
recurring touch points? What does
Yeah,
that
yeah.
look like?
So, we'll just do like a weekly stand-up where we look at the metrics on how things are performing, and so that if we need to adjust, we do. I also love A/B testing on emails, campaigns in particular, because sometimes you think you know what's going to resonate, and then darn it, your customers surprise you, and you're like, oh, well, I didn't realize that message was going to be the one that they really liked. So, even though we have a brief, I'm also advocate being flexible and changing
Right.
and adapting as your customers react to what you're doing.
Do you also find, I'm curious with like, so the last kickoff you did, even
Right.
for that feature, how many people are in the kickoff meeting?
That one was probably about 8.
8? Yeah.
So
that's
my
a big
entire
group.
team will be there. With my team, I try to empower them to do, have touch points on everything, because I want to build in the redundancy. If somebody needs to take a leave of absence or something like that, if I'm down a person, I'm not dead in the water on that particular product or asset. So, and again, I look at it from the standpoint as a manager. I want my people to be with me all the time. I don't want to have to go through what Tim's doing to hire people. And so I really don't want to, but I also am a realist, and I know that very few people stick with the company long term, and I want to make sure that my team is set up to be able to move on in this field and do other things. So I let them do all of it, and consequently, we have a lot of people in there because I want to make sure
Right.
we all are
Your
redundant.
resource, yeah. No, thanks for sharing that. And I think it's good to talk about this tactical element of it. And Kevin, you mentioned like project management is a big piece. And I imagine, especially if you're bringing together people from multiple different teams who are either from like one company or another with different backgrounds and perspectives, who are remote, more likely just talking over Zoom. What are some of the things that you found, work for you? What are some of the things that are work in progress?
One thing I'll just make a quick plug is definitely, if you guys have the budget, the resources, have someone that's dedicated to operations. That is something that's often overlooked in a big way, because when we were just Marqeta, we always had this very startup mentality where we're just going to run to the finish line, get our launches out the door, and then you end up sacrificing a lot along the way too, where you lead to potential burnout, where if you're going to launch the program again the following year, then you have to like scramble to find the assets, the resources. So when I mention operations, it's just being very clear on the whole journey. So what's involved in a potential launch? What are the channels that you're focusing on? Where do you have a centralized repository for content? Like stuff that's very basic, but it's often things that we kind of neglect because we're moving so quickly. And I think that's an area of focus that, even if you can get an agency to help you, part-time resource or whatnot, it's a huge benefit. And that's something that we didn't realize until after we brought this person on board, and they're literally a godsend.
Well, one of the things I think when you're having your repository, and this will answer the question on somebody like how do you push back on case studies, another way to push back on an unnecessary case study is to go to your metrics. So if you've got your item, your asset in a location where you can tell how many of the relationship managers or AEs downloaded it, you can say, look, the last case study we did, it had 3 downloads, and that's just not, there's no ROI on that. So that is another way for you to control and push back on people who are asking for assets that don't necessarily aren't needed. As we were a checkbox mentality where product marketing would come to us and say, we want to do, and they would check the box on every single asset that it would possibly exist without any thinking around it. And so metrics can be your best friend and so that's not you putting yourself out there saying, I think that's a bad idea. It's actually,
Right.
you can't argue with numbers.
You always have to separate what people think is happening, but then ground them in their actual behaviors to make sure that it works for them. And so Bridget at Slack, I'm
Yes.
sure, even thinking about, here, you got something on mind.
I mean, I could just comment on the operations component of it. I think that our team in particular is quite small at Slack, and there are very few of us, and there are very many things that we have to do. And so to sort of echo what Kevin is saying, a huge component of it. We've been sort of like a self-organizing team over the last like 6 to 8 months, and we have sort of just like divided and conquered because there is nobody doing that operations role. So we have to, like, we all literally were like, oh, like, you take high spot, I'll figure out a way for us to like develop a pipeline. You know, make sure you set up our, customer advocacy center. So like we're all just sort of like all hands on deck, but it's definitely not the day job. And so it's been really interesting too, because I like customer marketing community. Like I feel like I moonlight between the two because so many people treat them differently. I find them to be complementary and strategically important that they're aligned, but like there's a groundswell on the community thought leadership side around community operations. And that's like a huge new role and getting a lot of momentum. And I feel like you could translate that very easily. That could be a customer marketing operations role, but having like a wider or different lens, it really just depends on the organization and how it's structured. But I fully agree. I think like a more formalized role for that should evolve in the next year or two.
I think that's a great call out. So throwing out a scenario here, asking for a friend. You find that another team member, or not another team member specifically, but another team is really spinning up messaging around a use case. It's a use case your company's working on, but this angle is totally new. And what you know from advocates is that this might not land to exactly where they're at. You hear it in passing in a virtual Zoom hall, on town hall. What do you do?
I'll take a first stab at that. I love that. I love that so much because.
Do you?
I do, because I think I said this in my session yesterday. I just like secretly live for all of like the corporate jargony BS.
That's another
we're so
icebreaker.
customer centric, like, and so like you can tell that message was really developed like very in a silo. And so in a customer marketing role, like if I heard that, I always feel like I have to be sort of like the unpopular person in every room, and I am, and you develop a backbone over the years of doing this a lot where you just have to be the person to be like, no, that does not work. Or like, if you think that works, let's go vet it with this group of advocates or a cab or whatever, because if you're developing that in a silo, it's not going to land. And whether they listen to you or not is not necessarily your problem, but it will be eventually when you have to talk to the customer. So you have to do everything you can to try and advocate for them and on their behalf and get them a seat at the table.
Right. Anything to add, Kevin, Eileen? Has that happened to you?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, you have programs at your disposal that you might be able to quickly spin up and ask a question to be able to help defend your position. But at the end of the day, we have an executive who will make a final call on something, and it is definitely not what we would recommend. And sometimes you have to just let it happen. And I am also a fan of natural consequences. So when somebody does something, when somebody does that, it's there, then I pay extra special attention and really pay attention to the metrics and things like that, because what I want to be able to do is come back and say, okay, well, we saw this happened. This is what the result was. Are you happy with that result? If not, I would recommend we do this, and then have something else to put it in there. I try not to get into that position in the first place, and I just take the old advertiser's adage. I mean, like, how many times is it a message has to get in front of somebody before they like 7 times or something? But I will try to do that and just be the broken record. But it doesn't always work. So sometimes it's the I told you so. But you can't say that to your executive. So I say it inside, and then I do, like you said, like Bridget just said, it's going to come back and get you. So I want to be prepared for when it kind of went the wrong way.
Kevin, would you add to that?
I mean, I totally agree with what they just said. Sometimes it's hard, especially when it's executive leadership making some of these decisions, and they have their own silos that they operate in, and they're filled with people that are like, don't want to tell them the wrong thing. But I think part of it is just almost like letting them fail and then coming back to the table and figure out like how do we pick the pieces up together. But it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about like the product feedback piece, where it needs to be part of that whole journey from the very beginning, so it never becomes an issue like after the fact, right? So, and maybe that's just setting expectations properly with those maybe it's like the EA or the executive comms team that kind of supports those types of folks.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad you all have navigated that problem before. I will let my friend know that they are not alone. All right, so I think we probably have a lot of questions too, so we might transition to that soon. But I want to, give you all time to share some 3 pieces of advice, takeaways for people navigating, creating consistent messaging across channels, being that voice of customer advocate in their org, and then just watching everybody just message things in different places digitally.
Sure. Yeah, I can go. I think I was trying to remember them. I would say, for me, the big things are community as a foundation with advocacy layered on top of it in strategic ways is the groundswell you need to amplify messaging out to the market. That is how you build categories. That's how you create categories. That's how you get messages to the market. And companies are always not set up to support that. And so it's our job to help advocate for that. I'd say corporate alignment internally, having Tiger teams that involve executives or all the leaders, but also the people doing the work are really important. And everybody's voices should be heard internally. And building Tiger teams like that, like a double-decker Tiger team is the way to go, in my opinion. And yeah, I think it's just making sure that your customers' voices, that there are programs and infrastructure in place like CABs or advocacy programs or whatever, even if it's super hacky, to get that feedback in their voice into these messaging moments is really important.
Love that. What do you think, Kevin?
I think along the process, it definitely makes a huge strides if you could start to celebrate your partners that help you along that journey. So everyone likes to get celebrated in some capacity, so if you can give them a shout out for people that went the extra mile, that spent the extra time to help you, even if it's not like their core function or job, give them some type of recognition, like a $25 gift card or something like that. The other thing I've learned is that in most cases, 99% of the time, when everyone says this is the final version of something, it's not the final version of something. It's final 1.0, and then by the time you actually get to the finish line, you have 20 other iterations.
That is a great call out for everyone. Thank you for sharing that. Surprise and delight team members. Yeah. Be suspicious. Eileen, what do you think?
So I think you kind of got a gist of what my overall feeling on this topic is. But one thing I haven't mentioned yet, I think is a really good skill set for all of us to develop, is learning how to influence without authority. Because most of us are not in a position where we have direct control over all of these things. And so, for example, our SDR team is not within our purview, but they talk to customers. Our customer success team talks to customers, but they are not part of my in marketing, and so I don't have any kind of direct authority over them and their messaging. And so it's learning how to create those relationships. I mean, I think honestly this has been the biggest message I've heard the past 2 days is this is all about relationships, and whether it's relationships with your customers or relationships with inside. But I think that that's really going to serve you well, because once you become known internally as that subject matter expert, they're going to listen to you. And where I had a conversation just 2 weeks ago with the head of our SDR team, because the emails they were sending out were horrible.
Flagged.
Grammar. I mean, I'm the grammar police. But he was open and receptive because I've been building a relationship, showing him other stuff, and he's going to let me work with his team to help them with their templates, so that when they go out, it reflects better on what we're trying to do as a whole. So I think, in addition to all the other things you're hearing, I think that is a really good skill to work on.
I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, influence without authority. Would love to double click on that at a later date. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Let's pull up some questions here. Also, if anybody wants to shout anything out as we transition to Slido, that's okay too. Awesome. So, what tools do you use to test your messaging and campaigns, and what metrics do you focus on?
I can.
Yeah.
I mean, currently, I am not doing that, but in past roles, I have used Influitive at 2 companies, and it was really helpful to do that one-to-many sort of feedback function, but I've always also had some sort of like higher touch, like high impact programs that are like, I like think of Influitive as like high impact, low touch, high impact, but I also have like high touch, high impact, like not necessarily cabs, but like ambassador groups where there's like virtual monthly calls or other mechanisms in place to test that.
So we don't use a lot of tools. It's more recon, but we'll do like we have Influitive, and we'll test it that way. Because I run our customer advisory boards in there at a CIO executive level, we hear what's topmost on their mind. We also pay attention to the industry. I mean, mortgage industry is pretty apparent. I think you all could tell me what the problem is right now in the mortgage space. So understanding, getting that information is kind of the helpful part. Then we just use, the standard. If we're doing the email campaign, we're now a Pardot shop, and we just put in a new instance of Salesforce. So we just utilize those tools to test open rates and click rates and things like that. I think ultimately, though, it drives down to then the opportunities and leads created. We'll look at it even at that level where we're down to the account level to see how much they've interacted with it, where they are in the funnel and things like that. So it's not super scientific, but those are kind of the key things that we're looking at.
Nice.
The Pardot comment hurts me a little bit, but
Sorry. Well, we were Eloqua before, so we were never on your team.
Kevin's like, ah!
yeah, you can't win everything, right?
It was not my decision. So we can be friends.
I think, similar to what everyone else kind of mentioned with like private groups, we actually use private groups for Slack quite a bit to pressure test messaging campaigns. I mean, we also use back-end analytics like Adobe Analytics for some of that, but mostly it's just talking directly with like our core advocate ecosystems and finding out, does this stuff resonate? When we went through that whole process of rebranding Marketo, that was something that was very sensitive because we had such a very passionate customer base. And there's been ongoing discussions about like, do we want to keep the name? Do we want to remove it? And so I know this is being recorded, so I need to be mindful of what I say. But there's things like that you need to talk to your customers directly about feedback.
Awesome. Okay, good one. How important do you think personalization is?
I think it's incredibly important. However, the challenge becomes, somebody else mentioned dirty data. The worst case for our situation is dear user, because dear system admin, because what happens is a lot of times they create in Salesforce, it's not the best data, and so that part becomes a problem. Taking it beyond just their first name, I think it gets down to the personas, and I think that's more important. That where you're creating different messages for the different audiences, and in my instance, we have quite a few different personas of people in the buying group, and they all care about different things that our software does, and so it's, in my mind, it's much more important to focus on that and make sure that we're targeting the words we're using, the benefits and things like that to that level.
That's a great point.
I think it's insanely important. I've been at a lot, like small tech, medium tech. I'm not like crazy big tech. I don't think it's easy. Like nobody is doing this well. I don't think anybody's doing this really well. But I think that there's like now a tenor in the market where like we all spent the last 3 years like in our homes, and like everybody's digital experiences and virtual experiences online are now being held to a higher standard. And we're so inundated by products and brands that like if you're not standing out or showing that you care about me as a human being, like we're just holding brands to a higher standard. So I think now is the moment, and that's why I feel very, very passionate about finding like what customers' journeys and values are at your respective companies. Like I think it's so important, because if you're not the voice of value at your company and making sure that your customers are getting something out of it and using that to personalize based on where they are in their journey with you, then it's just like it's a huge oversight, and I think like it's just what's expected now. I don't know.
Kevin, what do you think? You're not in?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Adobe products, the tagline essentially like create personalized customer experiences, right? So to Bridget's point, I mean, a lot of customers have this expectation that Adobe needs to be very buttoned up when it comes to how they push out content, how they tell that story. And so oftentimes when it doesn't hit that expectation, then, you know, all kinds of issues arise and like PR nightmares and stuff like that. So that's always a fun thing, but we do try to be more personalized with how we approach content and that whole journey. One other thing that you guys could consider, you know, as a project that you want to do in the future, if you're looking to scale your programs, we're thinking about building out like a quiz where essentially it's like pick your own journey, where we use like Marketo or any other automation solution you want, and essentially create like a nurture series where you could do it based on different levels of audiences, from practitioners to mid-level and decision makers. And you can call it whatever you want, like, you know, what type of advocate are you, what type of, you know, customer, et cetera, and push out certain types of messaging that resonates with your customer.
Just to add, that's exactly what we did at Schoology, and we used Marketo to like input the score
Kevin's like,
and push out. I mean, we did, and then we used Influitive so that like regardless of what channel you were accessing that information from, the messaging was consistent. And like if I scored 50 and you told me I need to take these 2 steps to be a better educator in some way, that's not how it went. So don't quote me on that. But like you know, you would see that message in the form of content delivered to your inbox as well as content in your Influitive view.
Yeah, we're also doing a quiz. It's not for our advocate segments, but it's like very like first thing in the customer journey when people stumble on the website. So that's definitely a great way to segment folks. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of combine these last 2 questions, and then I'm going to leave the third for a joke to transition. Honestly. Okay, so this is a trap that I certainly fall into, I think especially as customer marketers, where you're stretched and you want to like deliver value, is around like delivering things on multiple channels at once. Do you think there's such thing as using too many channels, and what are the 3 channels you would recommend somebody focused on?
So yes and no on too many channels. We don't do all the channels all the time. We're very strategic about which channels we use based on what we're trying to message out there or who we're trying to reach. So I think you want to have as many channels as you can, warm and ready to go, but I wouldn't say that for everything you do, it requires you to do, use every single channel. That said, what's working for us at ICE Mortgage Technology right now in terms of the 3 channels I think are the most important for us. One is our in-product ads. We have the ability to, all the people who go into our software have to go into a main panel, and we are then able to do pop-up ads to them on whether it's product or events or anything like that. And we get a lot more engagement there than anywhere else. The second area that we're focused on, we don't have a whole lot of social media interaction, but LinkedIn is one of our better ones. And one of the reasons why we're focused on that one is because as we were talking about relationships and the mortgage industry and the self-promotion, a lot of our people, they're trying to work on their brand. They want to get their face out there because that's how they get more business for themselves as a lender. And so creating those opportunities for them to do thought leadership, and whether it's our executives or our partners or our customers, we're tapping into LinkedIn for that aspect. And then the last one that we really is really working for us, we're calling them Deminars. So it's a webinar format that we use on 24, but it's a demo, and then allowing that back and forth Q&A. But it allows that customer to see what's going on, ask questions, and then interact a little bit with the other customers. So those are the 3 right now that we're focused on.
Nice. Deminars. I'm glad you coined that. Yeah. What about you, Bridget? You're going to jump in?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think, so the answer again, I think is yes and no. I think I learned pretty young in my career that it was like the most valuable thing in the world to start my career in social media, and I'm sure many people did in this room. I feel like it's often what happens when you move social to community to customer marketing or something like that. But you really learn to just like show up where people actually live and engage, and like focusing on like building out like true personas. Like if you're working with developers, like where are they actually living online? Like, or are you focusing, if it's like a CXO, like where are they actually, are they even on those channels? Like targeting the message to like developing those personas like thoughtfully, and then targeting the messaging to those personas in the places that they're engaging is the best thing to do. And then just to complement that sort of personalization, I always do believe there should be like a high level cross-channel brand drumbeat that is, you can't ignore. So that it's like a mixture of those two, in my opinion.
Nice. Kevin, what do you think?
No, I agree with everyone. I mean, beyond the typical channels like social, email, etc., what we've actually started doing to create more of that personalized journey is we actually, throughout our email series, and we're using product guidance as a big one. So if you guys use Gainsight, Pendo, those are massive. What we've actually been able to determine is like people that are active in our community, we can surface up actual content to them through our nurtures and back in product to create this feedback loop. If you guys are interested in learning how to do it, I could put you in touch with someone on my team that does that, but it creates this holistic, regardless of where they're at, they get recommendations specifically on the type of content they want to see.
Awesome. Okay, so ready? Like 10 seconds, one word. Who should be writing the content?
Customer marketing, and then with the input from all of those others who give you the info, but you need a dedicated set of writers who know actually how to write.
Nice.
Yeah.
You agree?
Customer marketing and the customer.
It depends on the size of your company, and
Yeah.
you should always have people who know how to write writing.
And who know how to spell and who know grammar.
Yeah,
Yes.
but with oversight,
Yeah.
always by
Yeah,
customer
yeah.
marketing and narrative development.
Awesome. Wow, thank you all so much. Kevin, are we allowed to post pictures of you wearing purple? Yeah.
Yeah, go.
Okay, good. All right, awesome. Thank you all so much. Eileen, Kevin, Bridget, amazing.
Thank you.
This is so valuable. Really appreciate it.